conditions, all right. So first one was erasing the differences. Second one is accentuating the difference with what lies outside. Accentuating means it is emphasizing the difference with what lies outside. That means what is not Indian. All right, first of all, what is within the India, what is within our nation, all right, there is no difference എന്നാണ് കാണിക്കുന്നത്. We are all the same. അതേ സമയത്ത് we are emphasizing the difference that we as Indians have with the rest of the world. All right, so those are the two essential conditions or simultaneous conditions. That's why they have to be simultaneous. All right, and this is how a national identity is created. As a language, English in India automatically achieved the first. All right, so as a language, English in India is something that erases regional and state differences, right? So it automatically does the second, and second is facilitated, that is the accentuating the difference is facilitated when a homogeneous Indian tradition is pitted against an equally unified imaginary West. All right, so what is how is the second being accomplished? When Indian writers in English are writing this homogeneous picture, painting this homogeneous picture of India, they are presenting an India to the West that is essentially the same. It does not have any regional differences. All right, so that is what he talks about. All right, then it is only later, all right, it is only later after a few years that the alterity of non-Western countries, all right, especially Asia and Africa, the alternity, the diasporic ideas came to be important, and those came with Amitav Ghosh and Vikram Seth. All right, and they were the ones who brought about these works through their fiction as well as through their non-fiction. But at the same time, it was the schematic and metaphysical polarization of the East and the West. East and the West means East as an Oriental us and the Western nation. All right, the difference between them was common in the middle decades of our century, the middle decades of our growth. You can see these themes as becoming very, very common, and it is seen not only in the novels of Raja Rao but also in those of Balachandra Rajan, Kamla Markandeya, and Bhabani Bhattacharjee. You can see it both in Indian English literature as well as in the bhashas. The contrasts do not operate so sharply in the subsequent decades. When the decades passed by, these differences began to become less prominent. All right, but he says that there came an explosion of the 1980s. Why? Because in the 1960s there were writers like Nayantara Sehgal, Anita Desai, Arjun Joshi, Shashi Deshpande, who were very different from each other, but they were very, very upcoming new writers. But the 1980s was a relatively barren decade. There were not many great writers coming up. It was the old ones who were still functioning. And for a while, it almost seemed that this subgenre of Indian novel had run out of steam. That is, what are all of these people writing about this, the difference between East and the West? And it was almost that is considered to be a subgenre of the Indian novel, the difference between the East and the West. And it almost seemed in the 1980s that this subgenre has gone, it has run out of steam, it has not been it's not important anymore. But it then came the explosion of the 1980s. That means in the 1980s there was an explosion of those works which were specifically focusing on these issues. The tradition of Indian writing in English is discontinuous, so you cannot find a complete genealogy, as we talked about in the last classes. All right, you cannot find the complete genealogy of the tradition of Indian English literature because it is discontinuous. All right, however, many scholars have been trying to create one. A young man or woman in Bombay or Delhi who has half written manuscript in English inside the text. So here she's talking about how even today she's talking about a contemporary time. Now this is not today. This article was written in the 1993. All right. So when she's writing, she's talking about people. Okay, there's a young man or a young woman who's sitting in Bombay or Delhi or somewhere else in India, and they have written a manuscript, and they have written a novel or some other work of literature. All right, and they have kept it in their desk. They are doing their office job, or they are doing whatever it is that they do, and they have left these works in their desks. All right, and there are many closet writers like this. Closet writers, they are not bringing out their works, they are hidden. All right, and they aspire to be part of a global league. So for them, unlike our previous writers, For them, they want to go out in the world. They do not want to stay within the reins of Indian English literature. They want to be globally accepted. All right, and they do not want to contribute to some outdated ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ഇൻഡോ ആംഗ്ലിക്കൽ നോവൽ എന്നുള്ള കാറ്റഗറിയിൽ നിൽക്കാനല്ല അവർക്ക് ഇഷ്ടം. They want to be considered equivalent to any other British or American writer who is writing. All right, they do not want to be kept under a category. These young people may have drawn literary inspiration entirely from English or American books. Okay, so these young people, these are the new generation writers, she says. All right, they might not be familiar with the works of, you know, Rushdie or Kundera or even Raja Rao or anyone else. No Indian writers must have influenced them. It must be the American or British literature, or, you know, even European or Latin American literature that they have studied in their classrooms. We are studying all that, right? We do not study much enough of Indian literature. We are still so focused about the British and the American and the European and the Australian and the Caribbean that we fail to identify. We have reduced the literature of our country to one single paper in a complete 2-year course. All right, so that tells us about how we are not focusing enough on our own life, and that is on our own writings, and that is probably why the new generation will be more influenced by English or American books. All right, and they will never take the trouble to find out how Indian writers of older generation responded to their creative urges in English. How did they write in English എന്നുള്ളത് അവർ അന്വേഷിക്കാൻ പോകാറില്ല. Yet, if they achieve any fame abroad, if, you know, paradoxically by some fate of luck, if they do become globally known writers, if they do get some fame abroad, it will be on their basis of the relationship with India. So look at the paradox there. They completely refuse to give any sort of identification to the Indian English writers or the Indian English genre. They do not want to belong to that genre. All right, but if, you know, എന്തെങ്കിലും ഭാഗ്യത്താൽ ഇവരൊക്കെ വളരെ ഫേമസ് ആയ റൈറ്റേഴ്സ് ആയി മാറുവാണെങ്കിൽ, in the West they will always be identified with their relationship with India. അതായിരിക്കും അവരുടെ ഐഡന്റിഫിക്കേഷൻ പോയിന്റ്. All right, and whether they can find new modes of representing the complex reality of their own culture is something else. Okay, so can they identify themselves as something other than Indian is not a question that we are going to answer right now. Alternately, these aspiring writers may have spent a few years abroad. Some of these may have stayed for some years abroad. Some of them, you know, might have settled in other countries, and they might, you know, that's why they can qualify to be part of that displaced, diasporic, marginal, migrant population, which Meenakshi Mukherjee says is so intellectually fashionable these days. All right, so she's saying that ഈ diaspora ഒക്കെ വളരെ fashionable ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ടോപ്പിക് ആണ് ഇപ്പോൾ. So maybe they can become a part of that. In that case, they will write about their mixed heritage. They will not write about their purely Indian heritage or purely Western heritage. Diaspora writers always have a mixed heritage. All right, with the lost country looming large in the mosaic എന്താ ഒരു പെയിന്റിംഗിൽ ഇങ്ങനെ ഇരിക്കുന്ന പോലെ അവരിൽ നിന്ന് നഷ്ടപ്പെട്ടു പോയ കൺട്രിയുടെ ഓർമ്മകൾ, it will be like a mosaic painting in the background of their stories. There is no getting away from the burden of India if you want to write in English. All right, so you might not want to identify with India at all. You might not have lived in India at any point in your life, but as far as you will be writing about India, as far as you are identifying yourself as an Indian and you are writing in English, not in any regional language, but if you're writing in English, there is no getting away from the burden of India, is what Meenakshi Mukherjee says. Okay, so with that we are at the end of part 3. We have 2 more parts in this particular work. 3 more parts, and with that we'll complete the essay. So for today I'm going to stop here, and I want you to read this part that I have explained. See, I have not used the PDF as I usually do because I felt, you know, this was easier, and I was having some connectivity issues, so I couldn't bring up the PDF in my phone. So I know this PPT is very vague, but you know, it's actually more of a pointer to me than for you all. What you all are supposed to do is go back and read the text. All right, you have the text with you, and as I always tell you, as you read, mark the important points, write it down. All right, thank you.